Have you ever walked into a room and known, without anyone saying a word, that you weren't supposed to be there? Not just unwelcome, but unforgiven. That's how it felt the morning I stepped into the church at my ex-husband's funeral. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes darted. It had been more than a decade since most of them had seen me. Tina made sure of that. But there I was. Not because I wanted a scene. Not because I wanted revenge. I came because I had to. Because before betrayal, before silence, before they rewrote me as a villain, I was his wife. This isn't just a story about a funeral. It's not just about marriage or heartbreak. This is about what happens when a woman everyone forgot decides not to stay quiet any longer. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or told to move on before you had a chance to speak, this story is for you. Let me take you back to the moment everything changed. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and ensure you are subscribed to this channel to follow through with more stories. Because this story doesn't end where they thought it would. When I stepped into the church that morning, the air didn't just change, it recoiled. It was as if the room itself drew breath and held it. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, laughter died in throats, and heads turned in unison like they were part of a choreographed warning. Someone whispered my name, Leona, like it was something rotten. Someone else gasped. And in the tight hush that followed, I felt it all. The judgment, the shock, the anger wrapped in confusion. Every eye in that church asked the same unspoken question. What is she doing here? It had been over 10 years since most of them had seen me. Long enough for the truth to be buried under whispers and white lies. Long enough for Tina to rewrite history in her favor. I was the ex-wife. The one who left. The one who disappeared. The one no one invited. And yet, there I was, walking into my ex-husband's funeral, with nothing but my coat folded over my arm and a storm held tight in my chest. Martin Devlin lay in an open casket near the pulpit, surrounded by white roses and soft organ music. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Like the years had finally caught up with him in his final breath. And still, they had dressed him in the navy suit he wore to our 20th anniversary dinner. The same one I picked out. The same one I dry cleaned every year. A cruel little irony. Or maybe Tina didn't know. She sat in the front pew, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she barely used. Too poised for grief, too collected for heartbreak. That was Tina's way, delicate in public, cunning in private. Next to her sat my daughters, Jenna and Harper, both of them stiff-backed and hollow-eyed, pretending not to see me, pretending I wasn't there. But I was. Not for them, not for him, for myself. I didn't come to stir the past. I came to put it down. I walked along the far side aisle, past rows of familiar faces that once filled my home with laughter and now narrowed their eyes like I'd walked in bleeding. A woman I used to make lemon bars for nudged her husband. A former neighbor turned her body away. From the corner of the sanctuary, I heard a hissed whisper. Is that her? Followed by silence sharp enough to slice skin. I chose a pew near the back. Quietly, deliberately. Folded my coat beside me and smoothed the creases from my dress. I kept my chin high, my back straight, even as the weight of their stares pressed against me like judgment in silk and pearls. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. Let them stare. Let them speculate. None of them knew the whole story. Most never wanted to. The minister spoke. There was crying, singing, the kind of performative grief that passes for reverence when no one knows what else to feel. I kept my eyes fixed on the stained glass. I didn't need to look at the casket again. I'd said my goodbye long ago. But grief has a way of sneaking in through cracks you thought you'd sealed. And when the minister started reading the list of Martin's virtues, loving father, devoted husband, brilliant businessman, I felt something inside me turn cold. They were eulogizing a man I hadn't seen in years, even when I lived under the same roof with him. Martin didn't die when his heart stopped beating. He died slowly, quietly, every time he turned his back, every time he dismissed me with a joke, or an eye roll, or that suffocating silence that grew like mold between us. I thought that would be the hardest part, sitting through a funeral for a man who left me before he ever physically walked away. But then the lawyer stood up, a tall man in a charcoal suit, with a briefcase and a steady voice. He cleared his throat, glanced at the minister, and walked to the podium. "I've been asked to read a portion of Martin Devlin's final will and testament," he said. There was a collective murmur, a rustle of papers, a straightening of shoulders, a shift. Everyone expected something standard: a house, a trust, a nod to Tina, something palatable. But then he paused and read my name. To Leona Markham. Every head turned. Jenna, Harper, Tina. Even the dead seemed to stir. And in that single breathless moment, where no one spoke, no one moved, I realized this story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The sound of my name in that church hit harder than any slap could. Leona Markham. Spoken clearly, publicly, in the same voice that had just called Martin a pillar of the community. The moment it left the lawyer's mouth, it didn't echo, it detonated. No one knew where to look. No one wanted to meet my eyes, but they couldn't stop staring either. Even Tina froze, her hand mid-swipe with a tissue that hadn't caught a single real tear. Her mouth parted just slightly. Shock or fury, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Jenna turned toward me slowly, her face flushed, eyebrows drawn tight in confusion. Harper blinked like she was trying to process the sound, like maybe it had been a mistake. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. The lawyer didn't flinch. He didn't pause to let the tension settle. He just kept reading, calm and clear, like this wasn't about to burn down the fragile reality Tina had built around Martin's legacy. To Leona Markham, he said again, firmer this time. The Charleston property located at 1826 Waxford Lane is to be returned, in full and free of any remaining mortgage, into her name, as per the wishes of the deceased. A collective breath left the room like a gust of wind had knocked the air from their lungs. I felt it wash over me in waves. The house. Our house. The one I designed. The one I painted by hand, room by room. The one I left behind like a buried limb when Martin said he needed space. Now, after all these years, he was handing it back to me. I didn't look at Tina, but I could feel her unraveling. The same way I used to unravel, in kitchens and bedrooms and the front seat of our car, except she had an audience. I had walls. Then came the next blow. In addition, the lawyer said, flipping the page with the kind of care only a man trained in damage control can manage. The Martin Devlin Creative Arts Fund is to be established and maintained under the sole guidance of Leona Markham to support underrepresented women over the age of 50 in pursuit of artistic careers. Initial fund value, $480,000. You could have heard a pin drop, or maybe a heart shatter. My hands didn't move. My face didn't change. I had learned the discipline of stillness in 1,000 dinner conversations where Martin's voice filled the room and mine barely made it to the table. But inside me, something cracked open. Not joy, not victory. Something older, something deeper. Recognition. For the first time in over a decade, Martin had seen me. Not the wife, not the homemaker, not the woman who kept the dinner warm and her mouth shut. Me. Tina finally spoke. Her voice was thin, high-pitched with panic disguised as disbelief. There must be a mistake. That, he would have told me if. He never mentioned any of this. The lawyer barely glanced at her. All documentation has been reviewed and verified by probate court. These were his explicit, notarized instructions. She laughed then. A short, bitter sound that didn't match the setting. You don't understand. He would never give her the house. He left her. Why would he leave her anything? And there it was. The word no one had dared say out loud until now. Martin didn't die as my husband. He died as hers. And yet here I was, inheriting what she thought had been promised to her. People began to whisper again, but not with the same cruel amusement as before. This time, it was something else. Unease, curiosity, maybe even shame. I stood then, slowly, carefully. I didn't want to be dramatic, but I also didn't want to sit there while Tina tried to claw back the pieces of a narrative that had just splintered. I didn't owe her my silence anymore. I didn't come here for this, I said, my voice calm, even. I didn't ask for anything, but I won't apologize for what's mine. Tina stared at me, jaw clenched, eyes wide and glassy. Jenna looked down. Harper just watched me like she was seeing me for the first time. The lawyer cleared his throat again, but I was already walking toward the doors. Let them sit in the ashes of their assumptions. Let them piece together a new version of the story, one where I didn't disappear. I waited. And now, it was my turn to speak. Outside, the air was thick with late summer heat. The sky was blindingly blue, the kind that made you squint and ache. It should have felt like relief, leaving that room, that coffin, that crowd of tightly clasped hands and tighter jaws. But it didn't. It felt like stepping from one kind of suffocation into another. A quieter one. Lonelier. But at least this silence was mine. I sat in my car for a long time, staring through the windshield like I was waiting for the next scene to start. My fingers hovered over the ignition, but I didn't turn the key. My hands trembled, just slightly, and I hated that they did. I hated that even now, after everything, they still had the power to make me feel like a stranger in my own skin. They hadn't expected me. That was clear. And worse, they hadn't wanted me. Not Jenna, not Harper, not Tina, who sat with that smug grief like it was tailored for her. The woman who had Martin's last name on the headstone. The woman who wore his watch, his cologne probably still on her pillow. But none of them knew what I knew now. They didn't know about the letter. Not the one the lawyer read. The other one. The one I found months ago, buried in the bottom of a storage box marked with my brother's name. A letter written in Martin's handwriting. Never sent. Never spoken. Just left behind like an afterthought, or a confession too shameful to face. I hadn't read it all at once. I couldn't. The first time I opened it, I read the first line and dropped it like it burned. It took me 3 days to pick it back up. By then, I'd rehearsed every version of what he might have said. Apologies, justifications, excuses. I was ready for anything, or so I thought. But nothing prepares you for honesty from a man who spent the last years of your marriage erasing you. In the letter, Martin admitted it all. Not just the infidelity, that was the least of it. It was the silence, the gaslighting, the slow, calculated erasure of a woman he once claimed to love. He wrote that being with me reminded him of who he used to be, a version of himself he couldn't face anymore. So instead, he pushed me away. Not because I failed him, but because I didn't. Because I still saw him, even when he stopped seeing me. Reading it was like someone finally turned on the lights in a house I'd been stumbling through blind for years. It didn't undo the damage, but it made it real. It made it make sense. That letter is why I walked into the funeral with my head high. That letter is why I didn't shrink when they stared like I was an uninvited ghost. I didn't need their permission to be there. I had the truth. And now, after the will reading, I had something else too. Proof that even Martin, in his last breath, wanted to right the wrongs he'd buried under charm and silence. I started the car. As the engine turned over, my reflection flickered in the rearview mirror. I looked older, not just from time, but from carrying things too heavy for too long. And yet, beneath the tiredness, I saw something I hadn't recognized in years. Resolve. Not the kind you wear like armor, the kind that lives in your bones. I pulled out of the parking lot without glancing back at the church. They could sit there and wonder why Martin had named me. They could speculate, gossip, rewrite the ending of a story they never truly knew. But I didn't walk out of that church looking for closure. I walked out ready to start again. The Charleston house hadn't changed much. Not in the ways that mattered. Tina had painted the shutters a harsh shade of blue, too bright, too polished, like something pulled from a magazine spread she didn't understand. The yard had been manicured within an inch of its life. The wild hydrangeas I once loved torn out and replaced with soulless rose bushes lined up like soldiers. But the bones were still there. The slope of the porch roof, the crack in the third step, the wind chime I'd made with the girls one summer, still hanging, barely clinking in the humid air. I stood at the curb longer than I meant to, key in hand, heart thudding like a warning drum. I wasn't sure why I was nervous. Legally, the house was mine again. Paperwork doesn't lie. But standing in front of it, I felt like an imposter in my own story, like someone playing a role I'd given up years ago. The woman who once lived here had been younger, softer, full of belief, full of illusions. I stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath my weight. Familiar, unforgiving. I slipped the key into the lock, turned it, and felt the bolt release with a reluctant click. Inside, the air was stale, conditioned within an inch of comfort. Too clean. The furniture was different, sleek, soulless things that looked like they'd never been sat on. Tina's touch. Cold grays, chrome accents, no warmth, no story. The walls, once painted in earthy greens and soft clay tones, had been stripped bare, bleached into sterile white. It looked like a house waiting to be sold, not lived in, not loved. But under the whitewashed walls and catalog furniture, I could still see it. The life we built here. The ghosts of laughter echoing from the hallway. Harper running barefoot with a popsicle dripping down her arm. Jenna sulking on the stairs with teenage angst wrapped around her like a shield. Martin sitting at the kitchen table in his worn Oxford shirt, making lists, making plans. Me standing at the stove, stirring soup and swallowing silence. I walked through each room slowly, as if the floor might crack open beneath me and spill out the truth of what we used to be. The dining room still had the faint stain on the baseboard, where Harper knocked over grape juice during Thanksgiving. The light switch in the hallway still stuck on humid days. The smallest bedroom, my studio, was now a guest room, sterile and stripped of color, but the faded outline of my easel was still imprinted in the carpet. I knelt and pressed my hand against it, just to feel something solid. It was like finding the ruins of a temple you helped build, only to be cast out before the final stone was laid. I didn't cry. Not then. Not even when I reached the bedroom. Our bedroom. The bed was bigger now. New. Impersonal. The linen stiff, high thread count that lacked any history. Tina had scrubbed this room of me. No photos, no keepsakes, just a mirror that didn't reflect the woman I used to be. And still, the outline of the nightstand on my side of the bed remained slightly uneven. The ghost of my absence, still etched into the floor. I sat at the edge of the bed, the way I had the night Martin forgot our anniversary. The same posture, same weight in my spine. Back then, I'd stared at the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for him to remember. He never did. And now, years later, the door stayed closed for good. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I stood, walked back downstairs, and opened every window in the house. One by one, letting the air in, letting Tina out, letting myself back in. I didn't touch her furniture. Not yet. That would come later. The clearing, the cleansing, the reclaiming. For now, I just needed to breathe in a house that was mine again. In the kitchen, I found the drawer where we used to keep takeout menus and loose batteries. Inside was a folded note, a grocery list in Tina's handwriting. Almond milk, gluten-free bread, berries. Everything he never used to eat with me. Everything he pretended to hate until she came along. I smiled. A small, bitter thing. Then tore it in half and threw it away. Not out of spite. Out of ritual. I stood in the center of the kitchen and whispered to the empty walls. I'm back. And this time, I wasn't leaving. This house had never really been mine. Not in the way it should have been. For 25 years, I had kept it standing. I had painted the walls, scrubbed the grout, planned birthday parties, and wiped away tears on the living room floor. I had filled it with dinners and music, and the scent of fresh-cut hydrangeas. I had folded laundry in its quiet corners, while Martin made phone calls that became more important than conversations. I had hung artwork in every room and tried to make space for myself between the piles of expectations. But the house didn't remember me. It remembered him. His shoes still left faint marks in the closet I once organized by season. His voice still lingered in the hallways, not as words, but as absence. A blank space between the walls where affection should have lived and didn't. It remembered Tina, too. Her perfume, her touch, her quiet invasion. Every room had been rearranged, redecorated, repurposed. But I could still see what used to be. The kitchen table was gone, replaced with a marble-topped island that looked like it had never seen a family dinner. But I remembered the way Harper used to swing her legs underneath that table, humming softly while drawing cats on her napkin. I remembered Jenna rolling her eyes at my attempts to make her talk about her day. I remembered Martin tapping on his phone between bites, his attention always elsewhere. And I remembered the night I sat there alone, our anniversary cake untouched in the fridge, candles burned to stubs, wondering when exactly I had stopped being someone he loved. Now the island gleamed like a trophy. Tina's taste, sharp, metallic, all edges and no warmth. She'd tried to erase me with polish and high-end appliances. But houses have memories, and they aren't loyal to decor. I wandered upstairs, stopping in front of what used to be Jenna's room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the walls were bare. The furniture was different, clean lines, nothing personal. A guest room now. But I still saw her there, 12 years old, shouting over a math problem, her hair a mess, the poster of that boy band slightly crooked above her dresser. I had spent so many nights sitting on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair, convincing her she was enough, even as I forgot to do the same for myself. And across the hall, Harper's room. Still pale yellow beneath the coat of gray, someone had slapped over it in an attempt to start fresh. I pushed the door open and stood in the middle of the room, the echo of her laughter bouncing off walls that once held string lights and poetry scribbled on index cards. The grief hit like a wave then, not for Martin, not even for the marriage, but for the woman I had been here, the one who kept showing up, who kept believing, who kept watering dead soil and hoping something would bloom. I pressed a hand to the wall, eyes shut, and said her name softly. Mine. Leona, I whispered, as if summoning a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. You're still here. And I was. Not as a wife, Not as a mother with her hands full and her voice silenced, but as a woman who finally knew that the foundation was always hers. It was time to rebuild. It happened on a Tuesday, the same kind of Tuesday where the sky looks bored and the air feels too thick, the kind of day where nothing is expected to happen and everything does. I hadn't planned to leave the house. I was knee-deep in cleaning out the upstairs closet, sorting through the remnants of Tina's curated life, scarves that still carried her perfume, a shoebox full of holiday cards addressed to Martin and Tina Devlin, and a silk blouse with the tag still on it. A life purchased, not built. A life worn like a costume. I was holding a pair of her heels, narrow, pointed, impractical, when the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the silence like a warning shot. I froze. No one had rung that bell in years. I set the shoes down, walked slowly to the door, and opened it without peering through the glass. I didn't flinch. Jenna stood on the porch. My daughter. My firstborn. The one who used to sleep curled into me like she couldn't bear a single inch between us. The one whose loyalty had always tilted toward Martin, because he made her laugh, and I made her do her homework. She looked older, thinner than I remembered. Hair pulled back too tightly, lips painted in the same cold mauve Tina always wore. She stood straight, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. I opened the screen door and stepped aside. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," she said. "I always answer," I replied, and that was true, though no one had knocked in a long time. She walked in like the house was unfamiliar, like it had once been hers, but she couldn't remember where anything belonged. Her eyes skimmed the living room, the changes, the furniture. She said nothing. I waited. "I heard about the will," she said finally. Of course she did. I said nothing. "I didn't know he left you the house," she added, voice tightening like it physically pained her to admit it. "Or the fund." I nodded. "I know you didn't." She stood still, as if expecting more. An apology, an explanation, a breakdown. I gave her none of those things. "I guess I just wanted to hear your side," she said, but it came out hollow. Like it wasn't her words, but someone else's plan she was carrying out. Tina's, maybe. "My side," I repeated. "Now?" Her jaw clenched. "Mom, I'm trying." "No," I said softly. "You're not. You're trying to control how this feels, to you. You're trying to make it make sense without having to admit what's always been true." She blinked. "Which is?" "That your father failed me. That he failed us. And that you believed the version of him that was easiest to love." She didn't speak. Her eyes welled, but she wouldn't let the tears fall. Not Jenna. She'd inherited Martin's pride like it was a birthright. "I'm not here to fight," she whispered. "Then why are you here?" I asked. "To ask why he left me what he did? Or to ask why I stayed quiet while he made sure you never saw me clearly?" She looked at the floor. "He said you were difficult." I laughed then, quiet and bitter. I was difficult. I asked to be seen. I asked not to be treated like a shadow in my own home. I asked your father to stop rewriting our lives to fit the version he wanted to present to the world. She stepped back like the words burned her. "But you never told me," she said, and her voice cracked for the first time. "You never said anything." "I did. Just not in ways you wanted to hear. And by the time you were old enough to ask, you'd already picked your side." The silence between us turned heavy. A silence made of years, of missed birthdays, of polite texts that said, "Hope you're doing okay," but never asked what that actually meant. I walked to the window and stared out at the garden. The soil was dry, the beds were empty, but I had plans. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "Not at you, not even at him. She swallowed. So what now? I turned to face her. Now? Now I live here again. In the house your father built with my hands and then gave away like a prize. I live in it with no apologies. I make art. I breathe. I teach women like me how to take up space again. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the woman in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't asking her to. I remembered that gala, the one that cracked me open, long before Tina ever touched him. Martin had been receiving a leadership award. I wore a navy dress he once called his favorite. I curled my hair the way he liked it. I stood by his side like a well-trained ghost. And when someone asked who I was, he laughed and said, "She keeps me sane." Not, "My wife." Not, "Leona." Just some unnamed function, like a pill, like a ritual, like a background hum he didn't have to acknowledge until it stopped. I smiled that night. I laughed with his colleagues. I toasted his success. And when we got home, I cried in the shower with the water running loud enough that he wouldn't hear. But he wouldn't have heard anyway. He'd already stopped listening. So when I saw that headline, when I saw my daughters beaming beside Tina like they belonged there, I didn't scream. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't demand answers. Because I finally understood something. They weren't just smiling for the camera. They were smiling for a version of the story that made sense to them. A clean one. A simpler one. One where their mother walked away, and their father, noble and patient, started over. A story where Tina was the rescuer, and I was the ruin. It was easier to love him that way. Easier to forget me. I stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled down the letter. Martin's letter. The one he never sent. The one Ray gave me after he died. His final confession, etched in ink. "I hated the man I became," he wrote, "and you reminded me of who I used to be." I read that line again and again, until it stopped hurting. Until it felt like closure. They could have the photo. I had the truth. The turning point didn't come with a scream. It came in the form of laughter, sharp, careless, and dipped in the kind of cruelty that's disguised as charm. That's how Martin always delivered it. Polished, palatable, poisoned. It was Jenna's engagement brunch, a small gathering in the backyard of what used to be our home. The house Martin and I built room by room, decision by decision, when we still believed in things like permanence. By then, he had already asked me to leave. Kindly, of course. He always packaged destruction in soft tones and reasonable language. I had signed the divorce papers with a hand that barely shook, packed my life into boxes while he texted in the next room, and walked out without looking back. But that day, I came back. For her. For Jenna. I arrived early, out of habit. I had offered to help, and Tina accepted with a smile so tight it could have drawn blood. She wasn't threatened by me. Not anymore. She had the house, the man, and now, on display for the whole world to see, my daughters. The ultimate victory. I moved through the kitchen like a ghost with muscle memory. The same drawers. The same layout. I pulled platters from cabinets I once stocked. I chopped fruit on a countertop I picked out. I arranged mini quiches and folded napkins without comment. This wasn't my home anymore, but my fingerprints were still there, buried under coats of gloss and a fresh coat of Tina's curated life. Martin showed up late. Of course he did. That was his rhythm. Make an entrance, claim the spotlight, pretend the world only starts when he arrives. He wore khakis and a navy button-down, casual but curated. Jenna ran to him like she was 7 again. He kissed her forehead, called her his girl. And I watched from the patio as my daughter beamed beneath the weight of a love I had protected, preserved, and delivered straight into his hands. Harper came next, quieter, more cautious. She hugged me, then sat close to Jenna, as if afraid of being seen standing too close to the past. We ate, we toasted, we pretended. I smiled when expected, laughed on cue. Tina stood behind Martin, her mimosa raised, her eyes scanning the room like she was taking attendance at a play she directed. Then Daniel, sweet Daniel, Jenna's fiancé, tapped his glass with the back of a spoon. "Before we finish dessert," he said, voice cracking slightly, "I just want to say thank you. To everyone here. Especially to Mr. and Mrs. Devlin for hosting." There it was. That name. That claim. Everyone clapped. I didn't move. Martin raised his glass. That grin, the one that charmed donors and shattered vows, spread across his face. "Well," he said, "if Jenna turns out half as smart as her mother, and hopefully twice as sane, I'll consider it a win." Laughter. Not loud, not long, but enough. Tina giggled. Harper winced. Jenna didn't look at me. Not once. I felt my spine stiffen, the way it used to when Martin said things like, "Don't be so sensitive," or "It's just a joke." The way it did when he turned my pain into punchlines. This wasn't new. This wasn't shocking. But this time, it landed differently. Not like a slap. Like a final click in a long, silent lock. I stood up without ceremony. Without a word. I didn't throw my napkin. I didn't shatter my glass. I didn't demand the room's attention. I simply excused myself. I walked back into the house, past the hallway where we'd once marked the girls' heights on the doorframe. Past the living room where Martin first told me about Tina, though he never said her name, only a colleague and someone who gets it. I walked up the stairs, the ones I used to climb to tuck our daughters in, and into what used to be our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, my dress smoothed beneath me, my lipstick worn off. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because I was done letting it define me. Downstairs they laughed, but upstairs something shifted. Not loudly, not violently, just shifted. A kind of stillness that felt new, not emptiness, not defeat, clarity. I looked in the mirror on the vanity, Tina's now, her perfume bottles, her hairbrush, her world. But the woman in the reflection wasn't hers, she was mine. Gray streaks near the temples, tired eyes, but not broken. That night, after the guests left and the clinking glasses gave way to the hush of normalcy, Martin poured himself a scotch and sat on the couch like nothing had happened. I walked in quietly. He didn't look up. "Why did you say that today?" I asked. "In front of everyone?" He took a sip, eyes on the TV. "It was a joke, Leona." Jesus, don't be so damn personal. There it was again. So personal. As if I was too fragile, too dramatic, as if his words weren't designed to slice. I nodded. "Okay," I said, and I went upstairs, to the guest room. I told him I had a headache. He didn't follow, and in that moment, I knew he never would again. Not really, not ever, because he had already left. And now, finally, so had I. It didn't end with a door slamming. There was no screaming match, no suitcase hurled down the stairs, no neighbors pausing mid-morning jog to catch the show. Martin didn't yell. He never had to. That was the thing about a man like him. He could burn the whole house down and make you feel like you lit the match. It was a Wednesday. Blue sky. Calm breeze. I was folding laundry, his laundry, still, like muscle memory had never faded. I had his shirt in my hands, the soft striped one he used to wear when he wanted to seem approachable. I remember smoothing it against my leg, pressing out invisible wrinkles, humming without realizing. Then he walked in. No warning, no shift in the air. Just him, holding a coffee mug, and the calm detachment of a man preparing to order a meal, not dismantle a life. "I think," he said, "we should take some space." I didn't move. The shirt stayed in my hands. My heart didn't race. That was the worst part. I didn't feel shocked. I didn't feel anything. Because I had already lived this moment 100 times in my head. I just didn't know what the real version would sound like. Now I did. Space, I said, like I was tasting the word. He nodded. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Of course not. Drama was for women like me, wasn't it? Women who raised their voices. Women who bled visibly. I was always quiet. That was my mistake. He sat on the arm of the couch, sipping his coffee like it was a normal Wednesday, and not the moment our marriage finally gave up pretending. I looked at him then. Really looked. And I realized he was already gone. He had been for a long time. The body remained, but the man who used to write me notes on Post-its and kiss my forehead when he thought I was sleeping. That man hadn't lived in this house in years. We've been living separate lives for a while, he said. I folded the shirt, carefully, precisely. You're not wrong, I said. He blinked, like he expected a fight, like he'd prepared for one. But I didn't have the energy to perform a heartbreak he'd stopped earning. You're not asking for space, Martin, I said. You're asking me to leave. He hesitated. I just think it would be better. For who? That part he didn't say. Maybe he didn't have to. The girls weren't home. Jenna had moved in with Daniel. Harper was away at college. There were no witnesses, no one to play mediator, no one to catch the sharp edges. It was just us and the house, the one I painted, the one I filled with color while he filled it with absence. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because the war was already lost, and I was tired of standing in the rubble pretending there was still something to save. I packed slowly. Not because I wanted to stay, but because I refused to leave like a storm. I wasn't a wreck. I wasn't chaos. I was clarity. I took the things that were mine, not by ownership, but by meaning. My mother's cookbook, my paintbrushes, the photo of Harper covered in glitter glue. I left the crystal wine glasses we never used. I left the anniversary gift he gave me 2 years too late. I left the memories he had already rewritten in Tina's image. I signed the lease on a small condo in Savannah. 2 bedrooms, thin carpet, water stains on the ceiling. But it was mine. And for the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. The girls reacted as I expected. Jenna, tight-lipped, calculating, echoing her father, asked if I was sure. Marriage is hard, Mom. Everyone fights. Maybe you're just overwhelmed. Frustrated, emotional, unstable. I had heard it all before, every word designed to flatten grief into overreaction. Harper cried, said she didn't see it coming. I didn't correct her. It wasn't her fault she missed the signs. Her father was good at making absence look like responsibility. There were nights I sat on the floor of that condo and stared at nothing. Nights when I would open an old photo album and trace the outlines of smiles that meant something once. I'd lie in bed with one side cold, even though Martin hadn't touched me in months before I left. I'd walk through the grocery store and stop in the soup aisle, crying softly in front of a can of tomato basil, because I used to buy it for him every Sunday. But I didn't fall apart. I unraveled, yes, but carefully. I peeled away the years like wallpaper. Layers of silence, layers of pleasing, layers of waiting for someone to come home who never did. Leaving was quiet, a checklist, a series of motions, boxes, signatures, the sound of keys sliding across a table that used to be mine. I packed like I was handling fragile things, and maybe I was. My dignity, my restraint, the last frayed edges of who I used to be. But after I closed that door and walked away from the only version of a life I'd known for 25 years, I realized something no one ever tells you. Grief doesn't always come in screaming fits or late-night sobs on the bathroom floor. Sometimes it shows up in silence, in the way the walls don't echo the same, in the way you startle at your own footsteps because no one else is coming home. I moved into the condo like a shadow. 2 bedrooms, faded linoleum, a single window that caught the light at just the wrong angle. I felt erased. When you live your life for someone else long enough, you stop existing in your own reflection. You become what they need, what they expect. You become convenient. And when they stop needing you, it's like the world doesn't remember you were ever there to begin with. Martin moved on before I even left. Tina moved in like she'd been waiting in the wings with a cue card. And my daughters, God, my girls, they just adjusted, adapted, shifted toward the parent who stayed, the one who bought them things, who told them only half the story and smiled when they didn't ask for the rest. Jenna called once a week, her voice lined with obligation. "Just checking in, Mom." She'd ask about the weather, if I needed anything, like I was a neighbor, not the woman who once braided her hair every morning before school and cried the day she drove off for college. Her calls were short, painless, like a duty crossed off a list. Harper was softer. She came home for breaks and sat on my couch, legs folded under her, glancing at me like she wasn't sure what version of her mother she'd find. She asked questions. Sometimes. Not about the marriage. Not directly. But her eyes lingered on my face longer than they used to, like she was waiting for me to say what no one had ever let me say. I didn't. Not then. I wasn't ready. Instead, I went to work. I took a job at a dental clinic answering phones and scheduling cleanings for people who smiled too wide and laughed too much. I smiled back. I said, "Of course," and right away, and no problem at all. I wrote sticky notes and filed folders and disappeared in plain sight. I didn't make friends. The women at the clinic were kind, but young. Untouched by that kind of grief, the kind you wear under your skin. They talked about dating and movies and how hard it was to keep plants alive. And I sat there, drinking burnt coffee, nodding along like I remembered what any of that felt like. At night, I walked the grocery store like it might remember me. The same aisles, the same routines. But now, just one cart, just one dinner, just one coffee mug in the drying rack. That's the thing about rock bottom. It's not loud. It's not cinematic. It's a whisper, a slow leak. It's opening your closet and realizing nothing smells like you anymore. It's watching the voicemail icon light up and knowing it's just your bank. It's hearing laughter outside your window and remembering what it used to sound like inside your home. I broke quietly, like ice thinning under the weight of something it didn't ask to carry, like wallpaper peeling in a corner no one sees. And then, one day, I found the letter. A yellowed envelope, bent at the edges, buried in a box labeled Ray. My brother's name. The only person who never looked away when things got hard. I hadn't opened that box since the move, since the funeral, since the woman I used to be had vanished. Inside was a note. "Leona, read when you're ready." Martin's handwriting. Firm, no nonsense. Beneath it, folded carefully, was a letter from Martin. Unsent, unspoken, written in the same pen he used to sign our divorce. And suddenly, the silence had a sound. It was the beginning of something I didn't know I still had in me. A voice. I didn't open the letter right away. It sat on the dining table for 3 days, untouched, like a live wire. Every time I walked past it, I'd glance down, heart ticking faster, then turn away like it was something shameful. It wasn't fear that held me back. It was the knowing. The ache in my gut that whatever was inside those pages would confirm everything I'd already spent years trying not to believe. That he knew. That he had always known. That all the silence, all the withering glances and unanswered questions and sideways jokes were never accidents. That the forgetting was intentional. That my unraveling wasn't a misunderstanding, it was the design. The letter didn't belong to me at first. Ray had found it, tucked into a folder while helping clean out Martin's things post-divorce, before Martin died. Before Tina wore my rings. Before my daughters learned to stop asking what happened. Ray had held on to it, probably read it, probably decided I wasn't ready to know what my ex-husband had left unsaid. Maybe he was right. Maybe if I'd read it then, I would have torn it to pieces. Maybe I would have blamed myself harder, dug the knife in deeper. But now, with time and distance and silence thick enough to stand on, I was ready. I sat down at the table and slid the envelope open with the tip of a butter knife. The paper was folded twice, careful. His handwriting stopped me. Not because it was neat, it wasn't, but because it was his. Familiar, slanted, slightly rushed, like he always had somewhere more important to be. And yet here he was, lingering on the page. Leona. Just my name. No date, no greeting, no apology up front. I braced myself. If you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to say any of it to your face. I don't deserve that grace. You gave it to me anyway. That's the problem, I think. You gave too much, and I took it like it was owed. I didn't leave you because I stopped loving you. That line alone made me pause. My body didn't react, but something inside me did. Like an old scar twisting at the seam. I left because I couldn't face who I had become. And you never stopped seeing me. That's what scared me. You remembered the man I used to be. I didn't. You stood there, year after year, holding on to a version of me that no longer existed, and it made me feel like a fraud. A failure. Like I was pretending in my own home. And I hated you for it. I hated you because you still loved me. That's when the tears came. Not a flood. Just one, sliding down my cheek, slow and hot. I didn't wipe it away. You never asked for anything. That was your mistake. And my excuse. You carried us. All of us. I let you. When I met Tina, it wasn't love. It was relief. She didn't know me. Not really. She knew the version I handed her. The polished one. She didn't challenge me. She didn't look at me like you did. With expectation. With history. With truth. The ink smudged in one place. Maybe he'd cried, though I doubted it. Martin wasn't the kind of man who let tears take center stage. More likely, it was the weight of the pen pressing down too hard. I don't expect forgiveness. You already gave me too much of that. But I needed you to know it wasn't you. It was never you. The letter ended there. No signature. Just space. Empty and final. I sat at that table for what felt like hours, the paper trembling in my hand. I read it again. And again. Each time, the words cut differently. Softer. Deeper. It didn't change the past. It didn't rewind time and make him better, make our marriage whole. But it did something else. It gave me language for the wound. So much of what I'd carried had no name. Just shadows. Just suspicion. When a man gaslights you long enough, you start thinking the pain you feel is your imagination. You stop trusting your own memory. This letter? It was confirmation. That I hadn't imagined the emptiness. That I hadn't been crazy. That I had been seen, even if only after the fact, through ink and guilt and too much time. I placed the letter in a small wooden frame, not to idolize him, but to mark the truth. My truth. The one I knew in my gut, but never got to speak out loud. I set it on the bookshelf beside Ray's photo and my paintbrushes. A shrine. Not to Martin, but to clarity. That night, I poured a glass of wine and walked out onto the condo's tiny balcony. The Savannah air was thick and warm. A street lamp flickered below. I sat on a cheap metal chair and whispered to no one in particular, You saw me too late, but I see myself now. And that was enough. The first time I picked up a paintbrush again, my hands shook. Not violently, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to feel it in my bones. Like my body wasn't sure if it still belonged to me, like it had forgotten how to create something that didn't serve someone else. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, the cheapest set of watercolors I could find spread in front of me, a blank canvas staring back like it was daring me to try. And for a moment, I couldn't. For years, I had poured myself into art only in stolen hours, after the girls were asleep, after the dishes were put away, after Martin's mood had been navigated. I painted in quiet, tucked into corners, always small things. Flowers, houses, cards for birthdays that were barely remembered. It was never a priority. Not to him. Not even to me. It was something I did on the side, like a secret I kept from a life that demanded everything else. Now, here I was, years later, in a condo with peeling wallpaper and water stains on the ceiling, facing a blank page with no one to impress and no one to dismiss me. I dipped the brush in water, touched the pigment, and dragged it across the page. Color bloomed. Not perfectly, not beautifully, but it moved. And suddenly, I did too. I painted until the sun dipped low, until the paper curled, until my hands stopped trembling. And when I finally set the brush down, there was a soft ache in my chest. Not sadness, not grief. Something warmer, something older, like remembering your own name after years of being called everything else. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind buzzed, not with anxiety, but with possibility. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself in years. I kept the light on in the kitchen and sat beside the painting like it might vanish if I looked away. I kept whispering the same words, over and over, like a prayer I hadn't known I needed. You're still here. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror and really looked. I didn't reach for makeup. I didn't smooth the lines near my mouth. I didn't hide the silver streaks threading through my hair. For the first time in decades, I didn't look through the reflection, searching for the version of me Martin might have loved. I just looked. I saw a woman who had survived. A woman who had been folded and refolded to fit into spaces too small for her. A woman who had disappeared in plain sight and clawed her way back without asking anyone's permission. Later that week, I went to the community center where I'd once volunteered, before the marriage had eaten up everything soft in me. Before I stopped showing up to the things that made me feel real. The building was the same. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, the faint scent of paint and sweat and lemon cleaner. It smelled like memory. A woman at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "I used to teach watercolor here," I said, voice steady. "I was wondering if the program still runs." She lit up. "We've been looking for someone. Most of the instructors moved on after the pandemic. Are you interested?" I didn't pause. "Yes," I said. "I think I'm ready." 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a class of 7 women, all over 50, all carrying their own invisible scars. One had just lost her husband. Another had been through chemo. One whispered to me that she used to paint before her ex told her it was a waste of time. I didn't ask for their stories. I didn't need to. I could see it in the way they held the brushes like they were too heavy. I could hear it in the way they apologized before they even began. I saw myself in every tentative stroke. And slowly, they started to open. One afternoon, as soft jazz played through an old speaker, and the room filled with the scent of turpentine and possibility, one of the women, Mara, looked at me and said, "It's not about making it beautiful, is it?" "No," I said. "It's about remembering that you matter enough to make anything at all." She smiled, tears in her eyes. and I smiled back because I knew what she felt. This wasn't just paint on paper. It was proof that we were still here, that we had survived things people didn't even know we were carrying, that we weren't too late, too old, too broken. I came home that night, hung a new canvas on the wall, and wrote beneath it in small, deliberate letters, "This is where it begins. Not again. Just begins." Boundaries are quiet at first. They don't arrive with speeches or declarations or slammed doors. They begin in the smallest ways, saying no without apologizing, ignoring a text instead of rushing to soften a silence, choosing not to explain yourself to someone who never deserved your story to begin with. That's how it started for me. A slow, steady drawing of lines in the sand. Not to keep people out, just to keep me in. The first boundary was Jenna. She called on a Sunday, just before dusk, her voice sharp with unspoken tension. "Dad's lawyer reached out," she said, "about the will. I wasn't expecting your name to be involved." There it was. Not a question. Not even an accusation. Just a statement filled with every ounce of discomfort she didn't want to own. "I imagine not," I replied. She was quiet for a moment. "Did you know?" I could have lied, could have played innocent, but I'd spent too many years swallowing truths to make others feel better about rewriting me. "Yes," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "So you're really taking the house?" The house. Not your old house, not the one you helped build, not the one you raised us in. Just the house. Stripped of history. Stripped of me. "Yes," I said again, my voice calm, almost soft. "I'm not taking anything. It was given back." She didn't respond, just breathed into the silence, like she was trying to hold in something that had nowhere to go. She started, then stopped. "Tina's upset. She feels blindsided." I let that hang in the air a second before answering. She was never promised what wasn't hers. "You don't have to be so cold." That one landed. Not because it hurt, but because I'd heard it before. From Martin. From Tina. From friends who disappeared when I stopped hosting dinners and started asking for space. "I'm not being cold," I said. "I'm being clear. There's a difference." She didn't know what to say to that. I didn't expect her to. When we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't pace the floor or replay the conversation a dozen times in my head. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on the porch of the Charleston house, and watched the sky change color. Boundary. The next came in the form of a letter. Tina's handwriting, curled and immaculate, arrived in an envelope that smelled like the perfume she always wore. Artificial vanilla with a sharp, citrus bite. I didn't open it immediately. I made myself wait. There's power in not rushing to absorb someone else's narrative. When I did open it, I wasn't surprised. "Leona, I imagine this must all be very overwhelming for you. I want to make it clear that whatever Martin decided at the end was his choice. I hope, for the sake of our families, that we can approach this with maturity and avoid any unnecessary tension during the final proceedings." Warmly, Tina. Warmly. I almost laughed. I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in a drawer with things that didn't deserve to be displayed, but still needed to be remembered. I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't find the words, but because sometimes silence is louder. Boundary. Then came the old friends, the ones who hadn't called in years, the ones who stopped inviting me to neighborhood parties after the divorce. Suddenly, I was fascinating again. "Just checking in. Heard about the will. How are you?" "I've been thinking of you. We should grab lunch." One even had the nerve to say, "You must feel so vindicated." I didn't feel vindicated. I felt visible. There's a difference. I didn't go to lunch. I didn't return texts dripping in sugar and ulterior motives. I didn't owe them access to this version of me, the one I had clawed back with bloody, silent fists. Boundary. Even Harper, sweet Harper, tried once. She texted after the phone call from Jenna, asking if I could ease up a little for the sake of peace. I told her the truth. I spent 2 decades making peace so others could be comfortable with my silence. I'm not doing it anymore. She didn't reply right away. But the next weekend, she came to visit. No Tina, no performance, just Harper. She sat with me on the porch, neither of us talking for a long while. "You're different," she said finally. "I'm whole," I said back. That night, I lit a candle in the bedroom I'd reclaimed. I opened my journal and wrote 3 simple words. No more shrinking. That was the promise. Not to punish anyone, but to protect the woman I was finally becoming. It wasn't the letter that gave me power. It was what I did with it. For years, I had lived my life wrapped in explanations. I explained why Martin didn't come home on time. I explained why he forgot anniversaries. I explained the jokes he made at my expense, the silences he met my pain with, the coldness he never apologized for. I bent myself into shapes that made his behavior easier to carry. I decorated the cracks with excuses. I called it love. But when I found that letter, when I read the words, "It was never you," something settled. Not peace, not forgiveness, but clarity. And once I had that, once I saw my reflection without the fog of guilt, I stopped explaining myself. I stopped begging people to see what had always been true. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, intentional. The first thing I did was take the wedding band from the small wooden box where I'd buried it, next to photos I didn't have the heart to burn. I held it in my palm, turned it over. It was worn smooth on the inside, the engraving barely visible now, forever, M. A promise written in steel, undone in silence. I didn't throw it away. I didn't smash it with a hammer. That's not who I am. I sold it. Not out of bitterness, but out of reclamation. I took that money and signed up for a leadership course I'd wanted to take years ago. Back then, Martin told me it was a waste of time and not practical. I remember nodding, telling myself he was just being realistic, that it wasn't personal, that one day there would be time. The truth was, he just couldn't stomach the idea of me building something that didn't orbit him. So I built it anyway. The course was held in a modest classroom at the community center. Fluorescent lights, whiteboard with faded marker stains, no frills. But the moment I walked through the door, I felt something in me expand. I introduced myself the first day simply. "I'm Leona. I teach art. I'm learning how to rebuild." There were no second glances, no judgments, just nods, respect. I sat beside women who had walked through fire, divorced, widowed, starting businesses from scratch, raising grandkids alone. They didn't need my history to understand my strength. They saw it in my posture, in the way I took notes, in the way I finally stopped apologizing when I spoke. One night after class, I stayed behind to clean up, and the instructor, a sharp, silver-haired woman named Diane, said to me, "You have a presence. I don't know what you walked through, but you wear it like armor." I smiled. "I used to wear it like weight." She just nodded. "Doesn't matter how you carried it, only that you did." When I got home that night, I stood in the Charleston house kitchen, the one Tina had gutted and filled with cold steel and stone, and turned on the light. I stood in front of the refrigerator for a long time. It still had a magnet with Jenna's name on it from a school play. Somehow, it had survived the transition. Tina must have missed it. I pulled it off and held it in my hand. They thought I'd disappear. They thought if they removed my name from the mailbox, painted over the walls I chose, change the locks, replace the furniture. I'd cease to exist. But I was still here, not just breathing, becoming. I took the magnet, walked into the living room, and slid it into a drawer. Not out of spite, but because I decide now what stays and what goes. This wasn't Tina's house anymore. It wasn't Martin's. It was mine. Every inch, every scar. And I wasn't leaving again. They didn't notice the shift at first. And that was exactly how I wanted it. To them, I was still Leona Markham, the quiet ex-wife who had once worn pearls and folded napkins into perfect triangles, the woman who'd vanished after the divorce like a vapor, too meek to fight, too tired to matter. They didn't see what had been building inside me. Not vengeance, not spite, certainty. After years of second-guessing every word I spoke, every need I voiced, every silence I dared to hold, I was finally rooted in something they couldn't touch. And the moment it all began to tip was the call from Thomas Greer. He was Martin's estate attorney, a man with a voice like polished stone and a calm that made you feel like even death was just paperwork. He called me mid-morning while I was repotting a basil plant on the kitchen windowsill. I answered with soil on my fingers and the sun on my face. I remember that detail clearly, because it was the first time I felt light and power in the same breath. "Ms. Markham," he said, "we need to discuss the final distribution of assets from Mr. Devlin's estate. You'll need to be present." I kept my voice measured. "I've already been given the house and the trust. What else is there?" He paused. A long one. "There are sealed provisions, items not disclosed publicly at the initial reading, assets that require your physical presence for legal release." I didn't ask what they were. I didn't need to. Because by then, I had already reviewed the trust with Dean Holloway, Ray's old friend, the retired lawyer who remembered me before I disappeared behind a man's legacy. Dean had helped me peel back the legal layers like old wallpaper, showing me what had been left hidden in the foundation of Martin's estate, the Charleston House, the Creative Arts Fund, and beneath that, buried deeper, the quiet brilliance of Martin's final decision. He hadn't just given me what was mine, he'd protected it, legally, ironclad. Even Tina couldn't touch it. I'd asked Dean why Martin would go to such lengths for someone he let go so carelessly. Dean had looked at me, his eyes tired but kind. Because guilt is a meticulous thing, and because some men can only do the right thing after they're no longer alive to face it. The next call came from Jenna. Her voice was brittle, dressed up as concern. "I heard from Dad's lawyer. You're going to the final reading?" "Yes," I said simply. She hesitated. "Why now?" I didn't have a rehearsed answer. I didn't need one. "Because this isn't just his ending," I said. "It's mine too." The day of the final reading was overcast, the kind of gray that makes everything feel like a held breath. The law office was sterile, beige carpet, glass water pitchers, the smell of dust and citrus cleaner. I walked in wearing a black dress, not for mourning, but for precision. Black made people uncomfortable when you weren't crying in it. Tina was already there, sitting at the head of the conference table like it was her stage. Jenna beside her, shoulders tight. Harper sat further down, hands clasped in her lap, eyes flicking toward me and then quickly away. I took my seat across from them. Calm, unflinching. Thomas Greer cleared his throat and opened a thick manila folder. The pages were crisp. His voice was steady. "In accordance with the decedent's sealed amendment dated June 17th, the following stipulations apply." No one breathed. "To Ms. Leona Markham, the Charleston property located at 1826 Waxford Lane is to remain in her name indefinitely, with full rights of inheritance and deed protection." Tina flinched. "In addition, the Martin Devlin Creative Arts Fund shall remain under her management and oversight." These conditions are non-contestable and were reviewed by the probate court. Tina opened her mouth, but Thomas didn't stop. And finally, he said, sliding a folded page from the file, Mr. Devlin left a personal statement to be read aloud at this proceeding. Everyone stilled. Thomas unfolded the letter. If you're hearing this, I'm no longer here. If Leona is in the room, it means she came. And if she came, it means she's stronger than I ever gave her credit for. Tina's jaw clenched. Jenna looked like she'd been slapped. To those surprised by what I've done, understand this. I didn't honor her when I had the chance. I took, and when I had nothing left to give, I handed her silence. She gave me 2 daughters, a life, a foundation. I repaid her with absence. I didn't blink. To Tina, thank you for the comfort you gave me in my final years. But comfort is not history. It is not weight. Leona was the ground beneath everything I built. Harper gasped softly. Jenna looked down. I hope, if nothing else, this gives her back what I never could. Recognition. Thomas folded the paper and set it down. No one spoke. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. I rose from my seat, every eye on me now for a different reason than the day of the funeral. Not as a scandal, not as a shadow. As the only one in the room who hadn't needed to say a word to be heard. And when I turned to leave, I didn't take the letter. I didn't need to carry it. The truth had finally spoken for itself. The house was waiting for me. Not just the walls and windows, not the empty drawers or the familiar creak in the second stair. The house itself. It had always known when I was coming. Even in the years I spent away from it, in silence, in exile, it held on. Maybe not for me, maybe just with me. The day I returned for good, I didn't walk in like I was reclaiming something. I walked in like I was remembering who I was before someone taught me to disappear. The first thing I did was open every single window, one by one. I didn't care that it was raining, soft southern rain that smeared the glass and made the world smell like renewal. I let it in. All of it. The air, the dampness, the sound of something finally being washed clean. The living room was bare now. Tina had taken most of the furniture, the art, the curated nonsense she'd filled the place with to make it hers. Good. Let her take the things that never meant anything to begin with. The things that looked like love but never were. The only thing left was the bench by the window, the one I bought from a flea market with Martin 20 years ago. He had complained it was too old, too worn. I told him it had history. He told me I had too much sentiment for broken things. Funny how that was the one thing that survived both of them. I sat down, pulled my knees to my chest, and watched the water trickle down the glass. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a memory. It didn't feel like a grave. It felt like mine. That night, I cooked dinner, not because anyone expected it, not because there was someone to feed, but because I wanted to. Garlic, olive oil, fresh herbs I had grown on the porch. I poured a glass of wine, lit a candle, and ate slowly, deliberately. You don't realize how much of yourself you've given away until you're alone, and you do something, anything, for the first time, without wondering how it will be received, if it will be judged, if it's worth doing at all. After dinner, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old sketches, pieces of paintings I never finished, photographs of the girls with frosting on their noses, a receipt from the weekend Martin and I first bought the house. I ran my fingers along the edge of it all, to honor. It wasn't all bad. I know that now. There were years of warmth, years where we tried, where we meant the things we said. But somewhere along the way, he stopped trying. And I kept trying for both of us, until I had nothing left but a woman-shaped outline standing in a kitchen, holding dinner for someone who didn't come home. I don't hate him. I hate what he chose. I hate who he let himself become. But hating him would mean I'm still asking for something. I'm not. What I have now is better. It's small and quiet and simple, but it's real. I've started teaching at the community center 3 nights a week. My watercolor class has grown. We laugh. We cry sometimes. We paint things we never show anyone else. One of the women, Mara, told me last week that picking up a brush again was like hearing her own voice after years of whispering. I knew exactly what she meant. I tell them, it's not about being good. It's about being here. Present. Unapologetic. Unhidden. Some days I still wake up expecting to hear his voice, or the girls coming down the stairs. Ghosts don't leave easily, but I don't try to push them out. I let them move through the house. I nod to them when they pass. And then I keep painting. Not because I'm healing, because I healed. And I'm not going anywhere. It happened quietly, like most important things do. A knock at the front door, a familiar car in the driveway, the hum of tires on gravel I hadn't heard in what felt like years. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Some part of me had been waiting for this moment, not with hope, not with desperation, but with something steadier, like stillness that had finally matured into strength. Harper stood there. She didn't have a suitcase, didn't have makeup on, just jeans, a soft sweater that hung off one shoulder, and that look she always wore when the world felt too big, eyes wide, mouth set, hands clenched into something smaller than they should have been. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I answered. We stood there for a moment, saying nothing. There had been a time she couldn't get through a sentence without telling me everything, every crush, every fear, every unfinished sentence tumbling out in a rush of breath and trust. But that was before she learned how to look at me through someone else's lens. "I was in town," she said. "I didn't want to text." I nodded and stepped back to let her in. She walked slowly, like she wasn't sure she belonged here anymore. Her eyes moved over the furniture, the paint on the walls, the corner where our old bookshelf used to be. She lingered near the table where we used to eat spaghetti on Tuesdays and build puzzles in the winter when the power went out. "You changed the curtains," she said. "Too much light was getting in," I replied. She gave a half smile at that. Something passed between us then, something old, something that hadn't been ruined yet. We sat in the kitchen. I poured her tea without asking what she wanted, the way I used to when she was little, and everything could be made right with chamomile and honey. "I saw the article," she said after a long pause, "about the scholarship fund." I nodded. It felt right. Ray always said I should have done more with my art. I think he would have liked it. She ran her finger around the rim of the mug. "It's a big deal, Mom." "I guess," I said softly. "It's not about that, though." She looked at me then, really looked. "Then what is it about?" I took a breath, let it settle in my chest before I answered. "It's about having something that's mine. Finally. Something no one can rewrite or take or use to make me smaller." She nodded slowly, her lips pressed tight. "I didn't see it. I didn't know." "I know," I said. "You weren't supposed to." "I feel like I failed you." That stopped me. Because for so long, I thought the pain came from Martin, from Tina, from being left behind. But hearing Harper say that, it cracked something open. "You didn't fail me," I said. "You were a child being taught what to believe. I don't blame you for that." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I want to make things right. I don't know how. but I want to. I reached across the table and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Just be here, I said. That's enough. She let out a shaky laugh. Can we paint sometime? I still have that set you gave me, the cheap one, with the broken blue. I'd like that, I said. And I meant it. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. There were no apologies wrapped in bows, no magic words to make the years dissolve. But she was here, and that meant something. That meant everything. When she left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt full, of history, of forgiveness, of something fragile rebuilding itself, one quiet moment at a time. Not a beginning, not an end, just real. And finally, that was enough. The sky was soft that morning, one of those pale, washed-out blues that seemed to hum with quiet. The kind of morning that didn't ask anything of you, just offered a moment of stillness and let you choose what to do with it. I stood in the reading room, what used to be the guest bedroom. I'd painted the walls a muted sage green, hung linen curtains that moved gently with the breeze, and placed an armchair in the corner, right by the window. There was a small record player humming faint jazz, the smell of black tea curling through the air. On the table beside me sat three things: Martin's framed letter, Ray's photo holding that damn fish he always claimed was bigger than it was, and my leather-bound journal, nearly full now, its pages thick with the weight of what I'd lived and written through. I ran my fingers across the cover of the journal. I didn't need to open it. I knew what it contained. All the pain, all the silence, all the moments I could have screamed and didn't, all the times I smiled instead of crying, apologized instead of asking for more. But it also held something else. Proof that I hadn't vanished. Proof that I'd survived being erased and remembered how to write myself back into the story. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, in tiny decisions, in saying no without guilt, in painting again, in looking in the mirror and seeing a woman, not a wife, not a mother, not a vessel for someone else's story, but a woman. Martin's confession didn't rewrite the past, but it gave shape to a truth I'd always known, but had been too afraid to speak aloud. I wasn't broken. I wasn't the problem. I was just the one who stayed too long, believing I could carry a love that had stopped breathing. He didn't get to see me rise, and that's okay. Some people only get the beginning of your story. Some people only get the version they created. Martin got the woman who loved him without question, who built a home out of nothing, who gave and gave and gave until she bled herself empty. But I got the rest. I got the version of me who stood back up, who claimed what was hers, not with fire, not with revenge, but with calm, deliberate hands. I used part of the inheritance to start the Ray Markham Scholarship for Creative Women Over 50. The day I gave out the first grant, the recipient cried in the hallway, clutching the check like it was a lifeline. And in a way, it was. Not just for her, but for me. Ray would have rolled his eyes, called it sentimental crap. But he would have hugged me afterward. He always did. The rest of the money, I used to build a quiet life. Nothing grand, just full. I taught watercolor classes 3 times a week at the center. I held weekend workshops in the Charleston House for women who had been told their entire lives that art was a hobby, that their stories weren't worth telling. We painted in silence sometimes, in laughter other times. There were tears, always. But they weren't heavy. They were honest. Jenna hadn't come around. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I stopped waiting for her to. Some people need longer to see the truth. Some never do. But Harper visited often. She painted beside me in the studio, her brush still uncertain, her laugh more sure. She talked about her job, about a relationship she was trying to end with grace, about how proud she was of me. But she didn't say it like a daughter trying to fix something. She said it like a woman who finally saw me. Some endings don't come with applause. No grand reckoning. No final confrontation. Just the slow, deliberate return to yourself after a lifetime of being asked to disappear. I didn't get revenge. I didn't need to. I got something far better. Ownership. Not just of the house, the trust, or the silence they tried to bury me in, but of my name, my story, my voice. Let them say what they will. Let them remember me as the woman who showed up at a funeral they didn't want her at, who sat quietly while the truth rearranged every smug little lie they told themselves. Let them flinch when they hear my name in a room they once thought I was too broken to enter. Because I'm not angry. I'm not waiting. I'm just living. Fully. Freely. Finally. And if you've ever been erased, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside, remember this. You don't have to scream to take up space. You just have to stop asking for permission. Thanks for spending time with this story. If it resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Someone else may need to hear it too. Watch another real-life journey by clicking on the left, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.